whatever. It's all
Okay,
fine.
whatever. I like that attitude. That whatever attitude. I am having a hang on. Got to fix a couple things. Having a great little talk. Again, you and I tried earlier. We got a wonderful interview together. I'm just going to tell everybody because everybody knows it's fun. And then yeah, Maestro here managed to somehow delete it. I mean, well, that was the bottom line on our first interview. Uh, Now this one's gonna work. I promise. I'm gonna get this out before I can do more harm done. I am speaking with composer Gernot Wolfgang in Los Angeles, and we are talking about gonna be discussing his 2019 Albany Records release. It's called Vienna and the West. Groove-oriented chamber music, Volume 4, and this is again. There's a little twinkle in your eye here and there in stuff throughout that I'm uh, much clearer that there's much more than a twinkle going on. There's all kinds of very, very, very important music making and composition and so on. So you are really a very, very important American. Now I suppose we call you an American composer, but this CD, Vienna in the West, is your story, right? I mean, it's your life
Yes.
in Europe, in Vienna, and your life here in the West. And I'm hearing the jazz influences much more. Give me Gernot, give me a little overview of just this matriculation. How did these CDs begin? This is the second, isn't it, or are there more? It says Volume 4. So just tell me
Yeah.
about this and why composers want so much to get music, and then we'll talk about the artists on this CD. It's amazing. Go.
Thank you. The question is, why do composers make CDs and recordings? Did I get that right?
Well, it's pretty dumb, isn't it, the way you rephrase it? But yeah, I mean the drive. You and I think know. I mean, there's about posterity and so on. But go ahead. I'd like to hear it from the composer's point of view. It is about legacy, isn't it?
Well, it's actually a lot of different things. I think in my case, the main motivator is determined by who traditionally my champions are. And my champions are instrumentalists, most of them, and so musicians. So the purpose for the CDs, for making the CDs, is really to reach out to as many musicians as possible. And all the pieces on my records are published. So if someone wants to pick up a piece of music and play it, then it's available. And that's my way of reaching out to the world, so to speak, to make my music known to as many people as possible.
Sure, and composers and musicians have sort of said, I use the word greeting card in a way. Putting together a CD is kind of like it's a very rather expensive greeting card, but it's a very important greeting card, especially for a composer and for musicians. But it's very much worthwhile. I mean, we're not talking about selling CDs. You'd have to sell 500,000 CDs in order to put some money in the bank. But the point is about putting yourself out there, making sure that people know how to get out your music. That's the whole point of performingartsreview.net, if I may say so. We're going to put up your page and the interview and how to buy the CD, but also how to buy the music, as I recall. I think we have a link to get the music as well. Well, let's this is chamber music on this particular CD, Vienna and the West, and there is a story to be told. I think I should have asked you this before I pushed record because I might get myself in trouble, but I think I'm hearing indeed uh, in Passage to Vienna for piano trio and the last piece from Vienna with Love for piano quartet. Am I hearing things in each piece? I mean, is there a cycle, something going on with those two? Am I jumping the gun too fast on you here?
Yeah, well observed. There is the fact that in both pieces there is a cello solo. Not in a slow tempo and rather lyrical. And so, in terms of the form, there are some parallels. Um, Passage to Vienna is the much more extensive piece. It's about 15 minutes long, while From Vienna with Love is only 5 minutes. But yes, there are some parallels, and the pieces were written about a year apart.
I
So
just was going to comment on that. 2011, 2012 for these two.
yeah,
Yeah, and
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 what's so Yeah. And
So
what sometimes happens with to us composers is that consecutive pieces that have been, or not even that, sometimes pieces bleed into each other. There's some sort of unfinished business in one piece that where later you feel like you haven't quite addressed everything and you wanted to take another stab at a certain device or a certain mood or a certain instrumentation, then that usually happens in a subsequent piece rather than revising the original piece. And I think that was sort of the case between From Vienna with Love and Passage to Vienna.
yeah, very very interesting, and also you've been living in Southern California now for I want to say 20 years or something. 22? How many years?
22 years, 23 years actually,
23 years.
yes.
And I've known you over the years with the Santa Barbara Chamber Orchestra and other things, but you, because of your wonderful wife, Judith Farmer, of course, let's give Judith, bassoonist Judith Farmer, her due. You have this coterie, if that's the right word, of the most magnificent musicians in Los Angeles, and we are talking first world class musicians that live and work in the Los Angeles area. Why don't we just run down a little bit? I'm going to give the names, and we'll try and do this kind of quickly, and I can never get Robert's last name properly pronounced, but you'll help me on that. Edgar David Lopez, the clarinetist. Have I got his name correct?
Yes.
He's a Hollywood guy. I mean, does he do the studio work, the orchestras? What?
No, he's actually he's from Columbia, and he graduated from USC a couple of years ago, and he's just a wonderful player, wonderful to work with, and we all hope to work with him again sooner than later.
Yeah, and there's some incredible clarinet work on this CD of these. I think there are seven. Are there 7 or 8 pieces altogether that we'll talk about? Judith Farmer, of course, bassoonist. She plays in every orchestra under the sun, and her musicianship as a bassoonist, I mean, is just elegant. And she is your wife. So,
Yes.
do you want to say anything, or do you dare?
Yeah, sure. I mean, making these records together, that really, I treasure that because it gives us a chance to extensively collaborate on big projects that we cook it up together, we follow through together, and it's really a joy to be able to work with Judy that way.
That's wonderful.
And
You write some incredible music for bassoon for her too on this CD. Wonderful.
yeah, probably, if I hadn't met Judy, who knows? I probably wouldn't have written as many bassoon pieces as I actually did.
Makes
I think there
sense.
are 20 of them at this point.
Amazing. Well,
And
she's inspiring, that's for sure. Honestly,
yeah, she's completely inspiring. And then there's also, not only that, there's also the practical aspect of, whenever I write something for bassoon, I can just go upstairs and say, hey, does this trill work? Or does this work or not? Or does this tempo work? It's ideal for a composer.
And I'm looking at Amy Jo Ryan, hornist. Wow, my jaw dropped. I mean, what an incredible musician. Is she youngish, or she play around studios, or what's Amy Jo Ryan's story?
She's third horn in the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and she also plays in the studios, and she's just amazing, just like all the other musicians on this record. I feel so blessed, that I have this amazing lineup and these musicians who support my cause.
And the most difficult piano solo piece on the CD, I mean, in terms of complexity and trying to unravel its structure and all the rest, you have Gloria Chang, pianist, playing. What a gift she is! Did she just won the Grammy or something recently, or what? Tell me, do you remember?
Yeah, several years ago she won a Grammy, got nominated for another, and then 2 years ago I think she won an Emmy for a documentary that she made about film composers in Los Angeles who write for the solo piano. She's an old dear friend, and I always enjoy collaborating with her, and she always inspires me. She's so involved in new music, as you know. She always inspires me to write something really for her.
Yeah, and her intellect. In order to really wrap one's mind around. I mean, contemporary music for solo piano is especially coming from a guy like you, is interesting, complex, convoluted, fun, challenging, all the rest of it. Wonderful. It's absolutely a superb performance. We'll talk about it in a bit. Nick, is it Gerpi, pianist?
Nick Gerpi is a young up and coming not composer, pianist here in town, and he's lovely to work with. We both really enjoy collaborating, and we've collaborated on many live performances, and we're happy that he's featured on the CD as well.
Also, you rationed out the piano pieces quite nicely. You know what I mean. You have several pianists tackling this CD. Also, Joanne Pierce Martin, she's still a pianist for the LA Philharmonic, I think.
Yes, she is. She is. And she's also a dear friend, and I always love collaborating with her. And concerning what you just said, rationing out the pianists, all these musicians are very, very busy, so I try to not overload one singular musician with 3 or 4 pieces. So that's the reason why there is 5 pieces with piano, and there are actually 5 pianists. And also casting too. It's I try to match the personality with the piece with the personality of the pianist, or in general the personality of the musicians. And so there's another reason for that.
Yeah, very, very intelligent, very, very sensible. Nadia Shpachenko, I hope I have pronounced her name properly, pianist again, and Robert Tice. How do you pronounce his last name? I never can get it right.
I say Thies.
Thies. Okay, Robert Thies. I try to be fancy, what gets me nowhere. Penna and Robert Thies is, so well known in Los Angeles, plays all the time, everywhere. These are just wonderful musicians. And let's see. I'm wondering where I want to go here. Let me see what I've got down here for some questions. I'm going to use a quote that I think is a wonderful quote. Quote. This is a quote from you. A valid musical summary of my life so far. End quote. Now that's a pretty big statement for this CD, and I think I understand it now. Remember we talked. It's been a few weeks. I've had a chance today to re-listen to the CD. It's so much more juicy when you get into it for the 3rd or 4th or 5th time. And it is really truly a journey. Tell me about this evolution from jazz guitarist to concert music composer, which I think may tie in with this evolution from Vienna to Hollywood. Am I close?
Yeah, sure. No, I just felt after initially wanting to be a professional jazz guitarist, I got more and more interested in writing music. So I wrote jazz tunes. I changed my major to jazz composition, where I learned how to write for big band. And then I got a scholarship at Fulbright, actually, to go to Berklee College of Music. The intention was to dive more into jazz and learn additionally, get some more input. But when I was there, I realized that I had done all that already. I was just going to repeat what I had done in Graz, Austria, with my great teacher, Heinz Schadek. So I was looking for something else to do that still had to do with writing music, and that I knew nothing about, and that was film scoring. So I enrolled in the program, graduated, got the film scoring bug, got very, very interested in it, and at the same time it opened my ears to composers like Debussy, Ravel, Stravinsky, Shostakovich, Bartók.
Interesting.
Then I went home, taught at the jazz department in Graz for a couple of years, and thought, okay, if I want to make a run at being a film composer, I better move to LA, and I better do it now, because if I wait, it might be too late. So I had met Judy already at that time. We both took sabbaticals from our jobs in Austria and gave it a try. And eventually we settled here. And I went down the path of becoming a film composer. I was assistant to Christopher Young, who is a major film composer, and was his right-hand man and orchestrated for him and orchestrated for other people, and also worked on teams of composers for animated television. So all things that other film composers have taken at the beginning of their careers. Now, what happened to me was that in my off time, I started writing concert music, chamber music, because I wanted to write something for Judy. And then I realized from the feedback that I got from the musicians that I should take this actually more seriously than a hobby. So over time, it morphed into my second career. The first career, and there is no, those two careers are even. There's no first and second, but just for the sake of talking about it. The other part of my career is as now as an orchestrator for other composers for film, television, and video games.
Yeah, makes very good sense in Hollywood as just a means of making a good living, being an orchestrator, you know, and you have all of that expertise and skill. And how I guess what I'm getting at is how, you know, I always envy people who make that kind of plunge. I mean, Judy, I presume it would be kind of coming home to America, coming back to America, but for you to just say, here I go, I better take the plunge now, as you described, I better take the plunge now or not, and then just like picking up and moving half a globe away, and then how was your English? I mean, how crazy was this when you arrived? Did you say to yourself, "Oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? What's going on?"
Not really. No, I was always had a positive attitude about it, and I knew the worst thing that could happen is that after a couple of years, you know, we're going to go home to Austria, you know. But I wasn't counting on that. I really wanted to make it work here, and fortunately, it did work out. And you know, sometimes you just have to take a little risk if you want to gain something. You know, you have to put a little something on the line. You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
to
Yeah. Especially in this
out.
art form, in our art form, any art form, it's a risk. Every step of and every day is a risk. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, there are no guarantees, that's for sure.
let's now we're getting a little clearer about this CD, Vienna and the West, is for all those out there watching, is very, very interesting. Chamber music, very serious chamber music. There's a wonderful jazz influence, as we've just kind of discovered and spoken about, that I find really intriguing. This Gunther Schuller thing, this mixing of well, I mean, I think we're talking about the Vienna, you know, the whatever school of composition, the early 20th century, that sort of thing. We're talking serious. I really heard that influence today in listening to the CD after putting it aside for a while. Wonderful. But let me just run through the pieces a little bit so guys can, you know, people can take notes about what they're looking for. Road Signs for bassoon and piano, 2017. Gorgeous, fascinating, meditative, profound, wonderful bassoon writing. Incredible, wonderful. Passage to Vienna for piano trio from 2012, and then Route 33 for solo piano 2014. That piece is really something. I'm just dumbfounded by it. Windows for clarinet, bassoon and piano 2014. Impressions again. This is like three pieces, right? I mean, Impressions for clarinet, bassoon,
Yes.
horn, violin, and viola. But everybody see, you know, the cello and double bass. This is from 2002. That's quite early. I just realized looking at. And then from Vienna with Love for piano quartet. But you see, it's just a diverse chamber music ensembles and solo piano. So there's just you've got if anybody wants a sampling of your really serious chamber music, this is it, right? I mean, what was the earlier album that it was before this one?
Before this one was
Passage?
2006, called Passing Through,
Yes.
and the second one was Short Stories 2011, and the first one was Common Ground 2006.
Wow. Yeah. All of this was chamber music.
And they're all all feature diverse instrumentations, much like this album, Vienna in the West. And maybe the difference was that this time when I got ready to put together the repertoire for the album, it really struck me that, I mean, of course, it's always true that for every composer, 100% every piece that they write is a summation of their life so far, whether they're aware of it or not. And on this one, I became extremely aware. For some reason, it really, I was able to consciously trace my own roots, and also the elements that come from Europe and the elements that are inspired by my living in America. So it came into focus a little bit more than with the previous records.
Very interesting. And how did you decide, as I always ask, on the order for the CD? The order in which the pieces are placed on the CD. Was there any kind of mental work there? I mean, how did you do that? Because I see some of the years are quite diverse. What was the intention of the order?
Yeah, that's an interesting process, because before you go to the studio and record everything, you kind of always have an order already based on the live recordings that you have or on the synth mockups. And every single time that changes once you have the finished version of the pieces. So it really depends on listening, and determining what feels good. What's a good opener? What captures the attention of the listener right away, and what's a good piece for the first half of the record? What's good pieces for the second half, where if someone listens all the way through, maybe they might be a little tired already, or more focus to listen in the first half hour, 40 minutes. So these are all considerations, but it's really determined by what feels good. What transitions from piece A to B feel good.
I was just going to ask, it's very, very important that they somehow meld. For example, today, I'm in an apartment, so I usually just do earphones. But today, I pumped on the speakers and just wandered around doing my thing and listening. And I just find this CD beautifully listenable, as in I could play this CD, with people visiting. And that's really saying something for, let's just call it contemporary chamber music, It's wonderful. And it's about how one piece flows into another. So I'm glad you answered that. It's just not throwing darts at a wall. There's really so much thought involved in producing a CD that's going to, again, be legacy, but also make sense for all the reasons you've just described. Let's talk a little bit about the second Viennese school, just a little bit, just to kind of get an idea, because I'm sure I hear it. Name a couple of composers, and how come you, coming from a jazz background, what's this thing about Hollywood and the second Viennese school, and is it a contrivance, or does it really make sense? Speak to me.
Well, so the main protagonists would be Arnold Schoenberg, Anton von Webern, and Alban Berg. And I discovered them, for me, really emotionally about 5-6 years ago.
Interesting.
And I really immediately realized that they use a tonal language that I hadn't used up to that point. I could really relate to them emotionally, because they all came out of the romantic style of writing music, Mahler and all the composers before. And I just really responded to the Austrian component that's hidden in there. It felt familiar. It felt emotionally familiar. It felt like, okay, this is music from the place where I'm from, and I could relate. And then I was really became interested in exploring, what techniques are they using, what gestures are they using. I know how 12-tone technique works, but I never use it for my pieces. I'm more interested in the general sounds that they produced and in the gestures. And then ultimately, how can I use these devices and make them my own and make them part of what I do? And that's invariably in concert music. There's always jazz involved in one way or the other, either harmonically or rhythmically, or through the fact that many solo parts are written sometimes as if they were improvised. So I was working on creating that, and I think the advantage that I had was that I could already relate emotionally to both of these worlds. So I didn't really have to cobble together a product in an artificial way, but I just had to listen to what, so to speak, was brewing inside me, and let it out and put it on paper.
Ah, that was so brilliant, and that's exactly what composers do, right? What's brewing inside of me, I let it out and put it on paper. Wonderful. Thanks for that. But also, you helped me. I mean, the older I get, the better I understand, of course. And what I'm speaking about is that you just now, this very evening, for the first time in my entire life, helped me realize. Now I hear Schoenberg and that second Viennese school much more easily in my old age, because of course I've had all the, lots and lots of hours, hundreds, thousands of hours of listening behind me. So that all makes sense. But you just actually said to us all that you heard Vienna in those composers. Something spoke to you. And that's the first time that music, let's just call it, for sake of anything else, sort of esoteric, that kind of esoteric second Viennese school music, which has always seemed rather esoteric to me. You know what I mean? Notes in space making sounds. All of a sudden, you just described it as home, as Austria, as Vienna. What you heard. That to me is fascinating. Let's talk a little bit about some of the pieces on the CD. Let's see if I've missed anything juicy that I should be asking you. No, I think we pretty well covered that. Let's just talk about the first piece on the CD, Road Signs for bassoon and piano, and it's from 2017, so I think it's the most recent on this CD. Yeah?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it's the most recent one. And the story with this piece is that when I finished it, I had absolutely no idea what it was about. It was certainly, it was certainly apparent that it was one of the less Vienna-centric pieces. It was more a piece about California. And in the course of a couple of weeks, it dawned on me what was going on when I was writing the piece. And this is really not the first time that has happened to me. Same happened in Route 33, for instance, and in previous pieces, that sometimes your conscious mind needs time to catch up with the subconscious.
Absolutely.
And then later on, you're able to verbalize what was there already. So I was able to connect the dots and determine, okay, this is really a piece about navigating traffic in Los Angeles, all kinds of situations, extremely tight situations, peaceful situations also in the middle of the night, for instance, and confusing situations. And
You're just going to leave it at that, are you? Okay, well, let me pitch in then, because what I'm remembering are, especially in recent listenings, is the most beautiful bassoon music, meditative, reminiscent. And so in a way, I'm thinking, because you say that it's also about an allegory for life itself, so I guess I'm going to nail you on that. Now, come on, some of this most gorgeous writing is not just about daydreaming out the window in busy LA stall tavern. No, no, no. It's something more, right? There's something deeper, darker, not darker, but you know what I mean? Something more. Yeah? Come on.
yeah.
Help. Get me out of this.
The connection to that is, imagine it's late night and you're driving home and you're at a red light and there's not a lot of traffic and your mind begins to wander. So those are the situations that the lyric bassoon is featured, where you drift off into totally unexpected areas and then you get awakened again, by the green light, and you got to move on. But the lyrical bassoon definitely represents that.
Okay, fair enough. You win, you win. I see here the title of the piece is fun, but the music is quite serious, complex, and structured. Those are the notes that I wrote to myself. Passage to Vienna for piano trio. This is 2012. From present-day America to Vienna and back. Let's give me a little quick overview of this one.
Yeah. So in that case, I knew right from the beginning I had a storyline for it. I knew I wanted to go from by boat from present-day America to Vienna at the beginning of the 20th century, at the time when Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern were working, and back. And so the music starts pretty American sounding. There's a very jazzy violin solo
Yeah,
towards the beginning.
made note of that.
Rhythmic, a good groove played by piano and cello.
Yeah.
And then the music becomes, in terms of language, approaches more what the composers of the second Viennese schools were doing, gradually, more and more. And then there is a turnaround piece. There's a turnaround point, I should say, where we're headed home, and material that was presented at the beginning returns, but it is informed now by the stay in Vienna. Everything's a little bit more distant, and the gestures, some of the gestures in the second Viennese school type music have crept in. So it's basically saying what happens to all of us, that travel doesn't necessarily change us, but it affords new perspectives, and it makes us see things in a different light, and that's what ultimately the piece is about.
Exactly. For months, after studying in England for 3 years, I pronounced garage, and England made me eat eggs, out of egg cups. What can I say? The contagion of it all. Saying here I'm being a little bit flip, but I really love this piece. And also you very wisely, I see here a little note about contagiously rhythmic, this whole last section of the piece. In other words, you really bring it full, approachable, I think, to the public, a great finish, so you know what you're doing. But I wonder if it occurred to me while you were describing this is about the rub off of Hollywood a little bit, and even your film music training. Story. Everything is a story. Has that always been so, or did Hollywood creep into your brain and now you see and hear and write everything as a storyline? See what I'm trying to get at? What has Hollywood done to you?
That's a great question. I think I was attracted to Hollywood because I always liked writing music that had a story. So I had a natural affinity to it. And then, of course, once I started working in Hollywood, it became more part of my professional life, and that crept back into my concert music. So I think it goes both ways. And it's really, I do have pieces that are really about the music itself. I have a couple of duos with string instruments and bassoon where it's really about, what can I do musically with a bassoon and the contrabass? What can I do with the bassoon and the cello? But the majority of my pieces, I would say 80%, they do have a story.
Yeah, I love narrative anyway. I'm a conductor. I love pastoral symphony. You know what I mean? I love big landscapes and seascapes and all that good stuff. I think people need a story, maybe even. So now Windows for clarinet, bassoon, and piano with Edgar David Lopez. What an amazing, gorgeous, fabulous clarinetist. And Nadia Shapachenko, piano, Judith Farmer, bassoon. Did I miss anybody? I have a note here. This one's a dandy. Wonderful writing for all the instruments. A real understanding of how they work. And then, quote, a series of parallax views. Now, what in God's name do you mean by that? A series of parallax views.
So imagine you're in, let's say, you're in one of these big palaces in Vienna, and or it could be anywhere, in Paris, wherever there's a big palace, and they have these long hallways, and there's window after window after window. So if you walk along in these hallways and look out the window every time there is one, you see the same thing basically. However, every time your perspective is a little different. It comes from a different angle. So in this piece, there are basically two themes. First of all, the one that gets presented right away by the clarinet and then repeated by the bassoon. And then there's an interlude by the piano. So that's the second theme. And these two themes, they occur over and over and over in this piece throughout. And every single time in a different, you could say, disguise or not disguise. Sometimes it's not obvious. Sometimes it's very obvious, but it's the instrumentation changes, the surrounding changes, the tempo changes. So, and that is, I'm very happy with how I was able to really pull that through in a consequential way until the very end. That I really stuck with it, and I'm quite happy with the way that piece turned out. So those are our views.
Also, you have described exactly the art of composition. It's not just, I mean, most everybody that watches these interviews knows very well because they're all professional musicians for the most part, but people just think somehow you sit down and, I don't know, jot it all down. Somehow it all makes sense, and I mean, people have a hard time understanding just what a discipline and how hard it is to, as you've just described. This was much more than an exercise, but a real exercise, a real discipline. It's, if I understand it, in slightly altering the pieces per window frame, very subtle kind of, and as a work, a study piece, as some, you know what I mean, as a project. That's a grand idea. Yeah, and
Yeah,
I see here. I see it's a big, complex, entertaining, jazzy, but also first-class classical piece. That's what I wrote down. So congratulations. Let's see what else. We've talked about. I think we pretty much overlooked. How about From Vienna with Love for Piano Quartet? Because this is the full, in a way. Yeah, you've gone full circle. This is the last piece on the CD. Or not. Tell me about how this came together. What did he use for that piece? I don't see it.
So this piece was inspired by a sketch by Gustav Mahler for his piano quartet that he wrote in 1876. Still a young composer. And New York Chamber Music Festival several years ago put on a concert around Mahler's piano quartet, and they asked a number of composers to write short pieces inspired by Mahler, and they also sent out a sketch for the intended second movement that Mahler had done, and so I took that theme and made it the basis of that piece. And I'm not the first one to do that. There are numerous composers who have realized that sketch. The most prominent one, Alfred Schnittke. And it really, if you listen to it, it sounds 100% like Schnittke and very little like Mahler, but it's a fantastic piece. And there are other composers who have realized that sketch in a complete 100% Mahler style. And I decided to take a little bit into account the international character of Vienna at the time, where Eastern European countries were still part of the Austrian Empire, and therefore I included influences of their folk music, which means meters, which can be heard at in the first fast section, where the theme is presented for the second time. and I can't help but sneak jazz in, so
I was
that
just going to say
I'm
that's
never able for some reason.
yeah. I mean,
So
Michael note is very stylish American jazz. I don't think few of the others have thrown that in. Anyway, in the rhythms and energy of the piece, it's wonderful. Excuse me for interrupting.
oh no, no, that's okay. Yeah, and so that's how that originated.
And
It's been,
you feel good about the order of the music, about the what you're saying. Can you? I may have I may sound like a repeating record, but I guess I'm trying to say what kind of is this CD is so important to you, I think, really, of those you've made so far. It seems to be very, very important, a very a whole launching pad for whatever's coming next somehow, uh, because it's so good. The music is so serious and so wonderful and so interesting and so energized. I'm just trying to ask Vienna and the West. What do you want people to I know what you want people to come away with, and by the way, the cover is wonderful. The mountains of the Arizona uh, desert sort of thing. You know what I mean? The great ancient rock structures and the great ancient Baroque structures of Vienna. Is there? Can you put it in a nutshell? How's that? What
well,
you want people to take away from Vienna and the West?
well, well, I guess I'm going to have to repeat myself too because it's really my personal story. I did not necessarily spend most of my time in Austria and Vienna, but I did live there for the last 3 years, and I visited many times before. And of course, I was very connected to the music that had originated in Vienna. So that's one thing. The other thing is 23 years of living in the American West and doing numerous road trips and visiting all the southwestern states repeatedly and falling in love with the wide open spaces, that leaves an impression too. So it's really, and of course, your roots never go away. It's like people. Whenever I go to Vienna, I see people that I sometimes haven't seen for 20 years, and it's if like we picked up right where we left. So there's no estrangement. And the same thing is true for my roots. I don't feel estranged to my Austrian roots, although it's been decades since I lived there. But they're in there, and the additions are the experiences that I've had in the American West. So the album is really about that.
And you and your wife hike a lot.
Yes.
We're Facebook friends, and Nate, just a quick one, then we're going to wind it down. But nature, how powerful is nature uh, that you experience all the time in your hikes, especially here in the American West, and what comes out of your head in terms of music?
I respond amazingly to nature. I mean, it really rejuvenates me whenever I'm out in the mountains or in the desert. It's such a high quality experience. And in terms of music, I feel that it's a great role model for me because nature is perfect. There's nothing that could be improved upon. It's all the way it's supposed to be. And of course, as human beings, we're not perfect. And as composers, we're not perfect. But I can, uh, I can still strive to be like nature and see how far I get, see how quote unquote, perfectly I can realize what I feel and what I think. So nature is a great role model for me, not only in music, but also in every other aspects of life.
I'm so glad I asked because it's so obviously a part of your life, getting out and hiking in the mountains. Gernot Wolfgang, composer Gernot Wolfgang, thank you very much. We've just finished talking about your 2019 Albany Records release, Vienna and the West. Groove-oriented chamber music, Volume 4. I love that groove-oriented chamber music, Volume 4, and I'll say, some of the best musicians in Los Angeles. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven really important chamber works for various diverse instruments, including solo piano. Uh, Fabulous. Thanks for giving me some time. Now I better not lose this one. We're going to get this one up right away. Thanks.
Thanks for
See ya. Bye-bye.